Hello, hello. So today we're going to talk about equivalency, fraction, decimals, and percents. So the first thing that I want to do is remind you, maybe it's something you've learned before, but maybe it's not. I want to remind you that percents, fractions, and decimals are all equivalent. They just look a little different. They're like people. People may look a little different, but we are all equal, okay? So this is the same kind of thing, but with numbers. So let's get started. Okay. Okay, so this is something we like to call the equivalency triangle. The equivalency triangle is one of my favorite things because it's easy to follow. I like direction. Okay, so we have percents. This stands for a percent. This stands for a fraction. This stands for a decimal. Now, here's what I want to do. I'm going to start with something very easy for us because it's something we use all the time. And that is the number 1/2. We use this fraction all the time. Now, if you remember, when you're talking about a half or you're talking about any fraction, that actually means to divide. So if you're turning a fraction into a decimal, if you notice fraction to decimal, you have to divide. Okay, so if I'm dividing here, now in elementary school you were told the big number goes inside. That is not always true. So like here it says 1 divided by 2. Norm in the numerator goes inside the house. Donkey, the denominator, stays outside. Now 2 does not go into 1. So now we're out of numbers. The best part is every whole number has a decimal and zeros that come after it. Think of like a dollar bill. It's not just a dollar, but it's also 0 cents. So think about kind of like this looks like money, right? $1 and 0 cents. Now that we have a decimal here, though, we need to make sure we put our decimal into our answer. So 2 can't go into 1, but it can go into 10. So 2 times 5 gets me 10. And if you notice, I'm actually done. I actually don't need to use this 0 here. I added an extra 0 that I don't need to use because I'm already done. It is 0 and 5/10 would be my decimal. Now to go from a decimal to a percent, if you notice I go up, and it says move the decimal 2 places to the right. Now the reason why is because percent actually means out of 100. So this reads as 0 and 5/10. 0 and 5/10. Now if I wanted to, I can put a 0 on the end of this. It doesn't change the answer, right? Because if you look at this, a dollar, half of a dollar is actually 50 cents. That's still true. So if this is actually 50 cents, this is now 50 hundredths. 50 hundredths. Well, percent actually means out of 100. That's what that word percent means. Percent. Percent means out of 100. Well, is this already out of 100? It is. So that means that my percent would actually be 50% because I'm already out of 100. Now we're going to do a little bit more practice on that in just a second. So don't sit there and get a little stressed. I do want to show you this. This right here is a repeating decimal. What that means, it's 2/3. So 1/3 is the decimal would be 0.333333. The fraction 2/3 is actually a decimal of 0.666666666. This is called a repeating decimal because obviously it repeats the same number over and over again. Another way that you might see a repeating decimal is this right here. So remember, mathematicians like to have little tricks and tips to try to do shortcuts. This is their shortcut. They just put a line over it, and if you see that line over a number like that, like a decimal, it just means that the 6 repeats. So that does happen pretty often, actually. 1/3 and 2/3 are ones that I want you guys to memorize for sure. Okay, so place value. Place value is really important to kind of understand. if I'm looking at this right now, when we say a decimal, we just say and. Okay, so we start here and we read left to right, so it would be 0 and 375 thousandths, because that's what I end on. I end in the thousandths place. So if that number was not there, then this would actually be 0 and 37 hundredths. Now, if that one wasn't there, then this would be 0 and 3 tenths. Okay, so place value is incredibly important to know and to be able to use, because when we go from a decimal to a fraction, if you notice, it just says read it and then write it and then simplify. So you have to be able to read a decimal and then write it, because it's going to tell you what the fraction is. So let's do some examples. Just kidding. I gave you the answers, but it's okay. So we're going to do the percent to a decimal and to a fraction. We're also going to do this decimal into a fraction and a percent, and then this fraction into a decimal and a percent. So let's start here. So if I am going from a percent to a decimal, let's do a percent to a decimal. If you notice, a percent to a decimal means that you move the decimal 2 places to the left. So what's actually happening is you are dividing by 100. But instead of making you guys divide by 100, I am just telling you move it to the left. So it'd be 1, 2, and that would be, so your decimal is actually 0 and 25 hundredths. Now if you heard me read that, I read 0 and 25 hundredths. That is actually telling us what the fraction is then. 25 hundredths. Now, one of the key things that when we're going to a fraction is we also simplify. So this is actually the one I think of most as money. I think of quarters. So 25 divided by actually 25. You can divide the top and the bottom by 25, and you would get 1/4. Now, it would not be wrong for you to divide by 5 and then divide the bottom by 5. It just means that you would have to divide again to get the simplified fraction. Okay, so let's go here. If we're going to go from here to a percent, so over here we moved from a percent to a decimal. Now we're going to go from a decimal to a percent. So I'm going to teach you a little trick called Dr. Pepper. Let's see if I can actually write this out. Dr. Pepper. One way to remember, which way do I need to move this decimal? Well, multiplying by 100, dividing by 100. So if I'm going from a percent to a decimal, like I did here, I went from a percent to a decimal, you would go 1, 2 to the left. Just like we did here, 1, 2 to the left. If I'm going from a decimal to a percent, like I'm about to do, you're going to go 1, 2 to the right. So 1, 2 to the right. Now if you notice, I've got this little space here. So you're just going to put a 0 right there. Because this is actually, 4 tenths is the same as 40 hundredths. It's the same thing. Just we're adding an extra 0 in there. So this is 1, 2. So this is actually 40%. 40%. Now that we're here, if you heard me when I read it, I said 0 and 4 tenths. 0 and 4 tenths. Now, this is not simplified because 4 tenths can both be divided by 2. So if I were to divide the top by 2, I would get 2, because 2 times 2 is 4. And then 10 divided by 2 would get me 5. So that would be my simplified fraction. Okay, let's go to the hardest one, the eighths. Eighths are very difficult because they're a little bit long. Here's the worst part. Guess what? They're going to always give them to you. They love eighths. They love them, they love them, they love them. So, unfortunately, we got to get used to them, got to get to know them, okay? So if I'm looking at an eighth, 1 divided by 8 It's going to be a little bit weird to look at. I'm sorry. It's a little bit difficult to read. I apologize. So 8 can't go into 1, so I'm going to put a 0 here. I'm going to bring my decimal up, because I always bring my decimal up into the answer. 8 can go into 10 one time. And when I subtract, I would get 2, because 10 minus 8 is 2. That is supposed to be an 8. Then I bring down my 0, and I go, okay, well, 8 can go into 20 2 times, and I get 16. Uh-oh. I'm out of numbers here. Well, remember, this is still not changing anything. I can put as many zeros as I want. It doesn't change how much that dollar is worth. Okay, so I'm going to keep going and bring that down. Well, I know 8 goes into 40 5 times. This is where it's really important to know your math facts. When you are doing division, it's just the reverse of multiplication, so we have to know those math facts. So 0 in 125 thousandths. So now that I'm here, if I go to Dr. Pepper, I'm going from a decimal to a percent. So I'm going to go 1, 2 to the right. So 1, 2 to the right. Oh, that ends up at 12.5%. 12.5%. Okay, so now that I'm here, we've filled a whole bunch of stuff out. We've practiced. In your notes, there's a lot of different things. So I have some fraction parts. I actually have some pictures for you guys of examples of benchmark fractions. So benchmark fractions just means these are things that you need to know by heart. You need to know that a half is 0.5 and 50%. You need to know that a third is 0.33 repeating and 33.3%. So that's what I have here. I have the fourths, the fifths, and the tenths. These are ones that you need to memorize. If you need to make flashcards, then make flashcards. Okay, so some of those are like money. The half is kind of like a half of a dollar, a half dollar. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're huge coins. Then a fourth is just like a quarter, and a tenth is just like a dime. So the decimal part is actually how much they are worth in real life. The half dollar is worth 50 cents. That's the decimal for that half. A quarter, there's 4 of them that make $1, and they're worth 25 cents. So that is actually the decimal for 1/4. And then a tenth, you need 10 of them, and they're worth 10 cents. That is the decimal for a tenth. Last but not least, I want to talk about a third, because the third is the one that you've got to memorize, because otherwise you're going to be doing a lot of dividing, and it gets frustrating when you have a number that just keeps repeating over and over and over again. So a third and then also 2/3, if you can memorize those as decimals and as percents, you will be in a great place in math. Okay, I just want to mention that because I don't want you to feel confused. Okay, so next what's going to happen, there is a Quizlet practice over benchmark fractions. If you just click on the notes, if you go all the way to the end and you click on the notes, it'll take you to your Quizlet. And then also there's an assignment for IXL practice. I need you guys to practice throughout the week. Remember, on IXL, you have to have 100 points throughout the week. Actually, you know what? That's not true. If you are pre-AP, you need to have at least an 80 on fraction decimal percent. You have to have at least 80 smart points. Hear me when I say that. You have to have at least 80 smart points for IXL practice. If you are not in pre-AP, you only need to have 70 points. Okay, so that's kind of where we're looking at. That's how you're going to get 100. So pre-AP, if you get 80 smart points on IXL, you'll get 100 for the week for IXL practice. And then my other classes, my academic classes, if you get 70 points, you will get 100 for the week for IXL practice. So good luck. Come to tutoring if you need it. Bye.